Hello and welcome back. In today's video, we'll be looking at CSS pseudo classes and pseudo elements. So before we get into it, let's first define what pseudo classes are. Now, pseudo classes are used to define a special state of an element. So let's assume you have an input. You may want to show a different styling when a user focuses on that input or when a user hovers over something on your page. So that's what we use pseudo classes for. Now, pseudo elements on the other hand are used to style specific parts of an element. So in this h1 tag we have pseudo elements that we can use to style the before of this element and the after. And in a paragraph like this, we can style the first line or the first letter and things like that. So let's get into that now. First of all, let's look at the most common pseudo class. So we'll be starting from pseudo classes, and the most common is the hover pseudo class. So let's add it. So this is how you add the pseudo class. On your element or class name, you add a colon followed by whatever the pseudo class name is. So in this case, hover. So now let's say we want to change the color of our elements when the user hovers. So let's just add a different color here, and let's save this and go back. Now when I refresh this page, when we hover on this h1 element, you can see that the color changes. So you can add a lot of things to the hover class, and whenever the user hovers on that element, all styling you have added will be applied. So we can add things like even change the font size. Can use font size, and let's see, change the font style to italic. And now let's test that out, and that is what we have. So now our font size is not being applied, and that's because this is already overwriting this. So let's just copy this, but mute this, and can put this here, and now our styling should work. Let's go back, refresh, and there we have it. So now when we hover over our elements, the font size reduces and the color gets changed, same as the font style. Now there are different, you can add a transition property to your h1 tag so that this change of state will not happen instantaneously. So to do that, you add the transition property. Now we can set the transition to transition all properties that can be changed in your pseudo classes. So for this example, we'll just set transition type to all, and to make this transition work, we have to add a duration for the transition. So we can add a duration of 1 second, or to make the transition longer, can add it, set it to 1.5 seconds. So we'll look more on transitions in the transition and animation videos coming up, but for now we'll just look at the basic way of using this property. So when we go back to our page and refresh, when we hover on our h1 elements, the amount of time that it takes for the property styles to change should be slower now. So there we have it. So as it goes in and comes out, the transition plays out. So you can make this as short or as long as you want. So let's increase this a bit, it gets too small. So we can set the transition to 2 seconds, and that will give us a longer transition time. So now we've looked at the hover property. There is also another fun thing we can use the hover property to do. let's say we have a div and we want to create a simple popover for an element in that div. Now we can create something simple. So let's get rid of everything this page, and same for our styling. So now we can create a new div and call it box1. Then can have some text. Then we can now have a paragraph. Can wrap this text in a paragraph tag already. And then now we can create a second paragraph and call this a popover. Then we can now add some text. This is a popover. Now in our styling, we'll add a display property of none to this. So now in our page, what we should see is the initial text that will put just this. But now when we hover on this text, we may want to show something like more information about what the user is seeing or whatever. That's why we can use this hover property now. Now we can set that when our user hovers on this div box1, we want the popover to change the display property of the popover from none to block. So we set when this is hovered. So in our last video we looked at CSS selectors. So to select an element inside a parent, all you just need to do is to write out that element class name, then leave a space and the child class name. So in here we can now set the display property to a block level property. So now when we go back and hover, we can see our popover right there. So we can style this a bit and give it some padding, 12 pixels, maybe some text align center, and the background color of, let's give it our border color. So now on hover we have something better, and change it up a bit with color white and border radius 10 pixels, and that now is our popover. So if you notice, this is happening instantaneously, and if you try to add a transition property the same way we did in the last example to this element, you notice that that transition property does not affect this, and that's because you can't transition the change of state of the display property from none to block. So the display property can't be transitioned. Now to get over an issue like this, we can use the visibility and opacity properties. Now to use that, we set the default values to visibility hidden, then opacity 0. Then here, and when the user is hovering, we change it to visibility visible and opacity 1. So 0 is transparent and 1 is fully opaque. Now when we go back, that transition property will work on this popover. So refresh, and you can see the popover gets transitioned from visibility hidden to visible. Now that's the hover pseudo element. Let's move over to another one, which is focus. So now we can use the focus pseudo element mainly used on form inputs. So let's create an input here, and we can give this a class name of form input. So let's copy this and let's see the result we have. So now we have a simple input here. Let's style it up a bit. Let's give it a padding of 10 pixels, 20 pixels. Then can reduce this a bit to 5, then 8. Then we can change the border to 2 pixels, solid border color. And now if you notice, when our user focuses, which means when they click on this, that means they are focused on this element, you can see we have an outline in this our input box. Now this is where the focus pseudo element can come in handy. Now we can get this form input, and if you remember the way we created this over, you just add a colon to whatever class name or element you want to style, then the element name, which is focus. And now we can set the outline property, which is that box that will get around the inputs, to none. Now when we go back, you can see we no longer get an outline on the input box when we focus on the element. We can also take this a step further and change the background color of our inputs to something else when the user focuses, and since it's something darker, we also want to change the color of the text to white. So we can make this a bit darker. And now when we go back, you can see when we focus, the color changes. Same for the text, and same like before, you can also add this, you can also add a transition to it. So you can add 0.5 seconds to adding all, and all that is not really necessary. We'll look at the transition property more later in another video. And then when we refresh, you can see we get a transition, a nice transition of our colors. Now that's basically the focus element, focus pseudo element. Now let's look at something I talked about in the previous video, which is what we can do with links. Now let's create a simple link. So we can link this to test.html, and let's add a text here. So click here to go to test page, and refresh. You can see the link. Then let's create a second one to a web page or website we haven't visited yet. Let's see google.com, whether we visited that or not. Okay, we visited google.com, so let's create a second page in our project that we haven't visited. So test2.html. We can create a simple template here. So let's just change this. So click me to go to test2 page and copy file name, and the file we have here is test2.html. So now when we go back, you will see a difference in these two links. You can see this one has a purple color and this has a blue color, and now this is because of the states of the links. Now our browsers know when the user has visited a page or hasn't. Now if we want to change the default color that we have here of when our user visits a page, we can also do that using pseudo classes. Now this is it. So we select the anchor tag and we add the pseudo class of visited. Now this tells us this is the property that gets activated when the user has visited a link. So we can change this color to our primary color, and just like that, when the user has visited a link, the link color will be red. So as this is blue, if I click on this and go back, the link now will become red since this page now has been visited. And you can also just override the color. Whether a user has clicked a link or not, you can add a color of, let's set this secondary color, and just remove this entirely. And that's what we have now. So links whether visited or not, so let's check that out. Let's add a stored page. So this page, even though we haven't created it, doesn't matter, we haven't visited this page, so whether the page has been visited or not, all colors of links on this page will be green. Let's remove this. And now let's say the same way we had the visited pseudo class, we also have for unvisited links. Now for unvisited links, the pseudo class is just link. And if I set this, I can set this to say black. Now all links that haven't been visited on this page like this should now be black, just like that. So now that's it with the anchor tag. Let's move over to another pseudo class, which is the active pseudo class. Now this is the last one we'll be looking at. If you want to learn more about pseudo classes and pseudo elements, you can check out the V3 schools. Now let's create an element that this will show more. Okay, let's also use a link. So let's get rid of all this, leave one more. And now on this link, let's say we want to do something when our user is actively clicking on this link. So now user is actively clicking on this link, may want to do something. Now that's where the active pseudo class comes in. So when the user is actively clicking on this link here, we also want to change the color. So if we refresh this, when the user clicks on this link, the color becomes black, and when you let go, it returns to the normal color. So you can also, apart from changing the color, you can also increase the font size. Just set large, and just like every other one we've looked at, you can also add a transition to the change of state. So I'll go back and click on this, the link text gets bigger, and when we release it returns back to the normal size. So now that's the active pseudo class, and in this video now we've looked at the hover pseudo class, we've looked at the link, we've looked at the focus, we've looked at the visited, and now we've looked at the active. So that's all we're looking at for pseudo classes in this video. Next one we'll be moving over to is pseudo elements. So now pseudo elements can be a bit more complex, but if you really study them, they can add a lot of more spice to your web page. So just like before, let's get rid of all this and create a simple header tag. We call this heading 1. So then our web page, we should have a simple h1 heading. Now the first pseudo element we'll be looking at is the before pseudo element. Let's just get that out. Now pseudo classes are written with 1 column, pseudo elements are written with 2. So add the second one and before. Now we can add, just like as this is depicting, you can add content to your elements before the element starts. So let's just look at that and say, hey, this is some before content. And go back, let's see the results. And here we have it. We have the before content, and if you notice, this can be selected because it's not in the hierarchy of the HTML page. If you inspect this page, if you view the page so by clicking Ctrl U, you will see that this text is not in HTML because it's being added in CSS. So we can add some spacing between this and this. Can add that by, let's say, margin left, or no, margin right, since this is before. So margin right of 5 pixels. So you can do this, still add some content before your elements, but most times this is used for styling and adding some kind of elements to your headers to make them look more unique. So let's look at that. Let's say we want to surround all our heading, all our h1 tags with a dash in front and a dash at the back. So now to do that, you can get rid of this content right here, and let's create a small but long horizontal line. So now the width can be 20 pixels. You can give the height of 3 pixels, and now a background color of border color. Now we'll save this and go back. We don't get any results because we need to add how these elements should be displayed. So we'll want to add a display of inline block, because if you remember, a block level element takes up the entire width of the parent. So if you add that, you can see that even though it's as small as this, it takes up this entire width. So we want to set it to inline. Then we can also increase the size a bit because it was small. And there we have it. So just like as we looked at in the previous video, in selecting elements, we can apply one block of styling to multiple elements, and same applies for pseudo elements. So we can just add a comma here and change this before now to after, and we get the same thing in front of the heading. And there we have it. And now to now give it more spacing, we can now do them individually with margin right of 20 pixels and h1 after margin left of 20 pixels. So now we've been able to append fully made up styling with the pseudo elements. Now let's look at more unconventional pseudo elements that can be used, especially in typography. So for this example, for this video, we'll be looking at the first letter and first line pseudo elements. Now let's come under this and create a div with a class name of paragraph text. So here now we can just have some really long text, and the result in our page should look something like this. So now we may want to style the first line of this element of this whole text. Now if you want to start doing this and now just manually break up where the text starts, so we can add this here synth. So let's look for where that is in our page. You can just Ctrl F and search that out. So now that's here. You may now decide to just add a paragraph tag, just break them up into different paragraphs. Now the problem with this is, one, you get spacing with this, and two, if the width of the screen reduces, you can see that that one you added into a paragraph now is no longer the first line of the text. Now this is where the pseudo element comes in. So this can still remain one whole paragraph. And now we can start our styling. So copy the class name that you just added to your div, and we can now select the paragraph tag and add the pseudo element of first line. Now we may want our first line to be bigger than the rest, or have a different color, or let's just do both. So this, you can set the color to, let it be primary color, and font size should be 30 pixels. Now note, pseudo elements are not change of state, they are just additional styling or additional content being added to your element, so you can't transition these elements or styling. So now when I refresh this, you can see the first line gets the styling. And the good thing about this is, the more your screen size reduces, it does not matter which text, any text that is being added or being removed will get this styling. So if I increase this size, any text that falls into the first line will get this styling. So just like this. And it's the same thing as we reduce, the styling gets removed from any element, any text that is not in the first line. That's a very good handy feature. And now we can look at the first element, first letter pseudo element. So first letter, so we want the first letter to have a different color, so let's make it gray, the border color, and we want this to also be big. So imagine this is like a book, and books that have the first letter in the chapter always being big, so this is how you can achieve something like that. And you can see this is the result we get. So styling the first letter and the first line. So that'll be it for pseudo elements and pseudo classes. I hope you've been able to learn something from this. You can look more into the before and after pseudo elements, because these are the most widely used pseudo elements in web development. And just check out W3 Schools to learn more about this topic, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.